The study of leys began in 1921, when Alfred Watkins, a Herefordshire flour miller, was inspired while out walking one day to see the countryside covered with a network of straight lines linking prehistoric sites. He was surprised when checking on a map to find the sites were arranged in a system of alignments, and he spent the rest of his life studying the subject. He brought out a number of books on the lines, which he called leys, the most notable being the Old Straight Track, and he started a straight track club which continued until disbanded in 1948. In his books he made full use of one of his other main interests in life, photography, in which he was an authority and pioneer, having developed the first practical exposure meter. Whatever his private views may have been, Watkins always put forward leys as an archaeological discovery, a system of route marking used in ancient times, and he received a great deal of hostility from the archaeological establishment, which continues to this day. However, there is some evidence that during the time of the Straight Track Club there was beginning to be a realisation there may be other implications to the alignments. When glancing at an article in one of the club's folios in Hereford's Central Library during the moot organised by John Michel in 1971, I noticed a reference to energies associated with standing stones. Much later, this concept of leys as currents of energy was to be put forward again in Skyways and Landmarks, a small booklet written by Tony Wedd in 1961. Watkins took as his main points of leys the obvious prehistoric ones of stones, tumuli, etc., but also found that many apparently non-prehistoric sites, such as pre-Reformation churches and medieval castles, would fall on the alignments. He accepted them as marked points due to the fact that they were often built in more ancient times, though not always for the same reason. The alignment of churches was rationalised by an edict from Pope Gregory in the 7th century, saying that pagan temples should be converted into churches. Castles were usually said to be on the alignments because they tended to be on the highest point locally. Today the government marks the highest points with telecommunication masts, and I have often found microwave towers on leys. Particularly memorable is the beautiful alignment I walked in Scotland once with the Northern Earth Mysteries group. This has a microwave station on one of its hills. He also noticed that clumps of trees, particularly Scots pines, seem to often occur on leys, also stretches of straight track, road, crossroads and junctions, though he would only accept this last group of sites as confirmation points. In the current wave of interest in the subject, which began in the 1960s, another phenomenon was discovered which would probably have disturbed Watkins more than ideas of energy. Far more churches than could be expected from Gregory's edict were found on leys, and many were found to be comparatively modern, with no old church having been known on the site. St Augustine's Church, Addlestone, for example, was built in 1939. It has several leys passing through it and has a very powerful atmosphere. There may have been something there before. It has the feel of a much older church, but if so, no information on it has survived. Certainly in the case of pine clumps, the most ephemeral of all the ley points, there are far more than can ever be accounted for by seeding from prehistoric clumps. It began to look as if, astounding as it may seem, the ley system is self-replicating, regenerating its mark points by subconsciously impelling people to build certain buildings or plant pines at the spot where they are intended to be. This is backed up by many legends of supernatural beings moving stones, as at God's Hill on the Isle of Wight, where the church was started on one spot, but the angels were said to have moved the stones to another each night, and eventually the builders relented and the church was built there. But if places of worship were subconsciously sited, it cannot simply be to make the job of ley hunting easier. There must be deeper reasons, and to detect them we must examine the uses to which the buildings were put. Sound, as mentioned in Skyways and Landmarks Revisited, published in 1985, is an integral part of most worship, and it certainly seems likely that this boosts the energy in the leys. An opposite principle to that of the Sanjar ley detector, which produces vibration at powerful places. Yet this cannot be the whole story, for I have found at least 2 Quaker meeting houses on leys, Kirby Moorside in Yorkshire and Woking, Surrey. And it seems likely that others are too, for I've experienced head hum in every meeting house I've visited, including the one at Egham, which is a modern bungalow on a housing estate. Yet the Quakers do not have music at their meetings, which are mostly silent, except for when a participant feels moved to speak. So, it would seem that the act of worship in itself is important, and this is not restricted to Christianity, as we shall see. Yet the doctrines of the various religions are different and jealously guarded, usually with each believing their own creed to be the only true one. The only common theme seems to be that worship of the Creator, in whatever form he, she or it is envisaged. Nevertheless, the lay system seems to make no distinction between them, and we must try to investigate why this might be so. A particularly good example of a lay indicating subconscious sighting is the alignment between St Mary's East Barnet and Pollard's Hill, described by Chris Street in his book Earthstars, and which seems to be an axis lay for his subsequently found star patterns, which indicate that the whole area of London was laid out geometrically, whether by human agency or some other influence affecting human activity. Some points of interest the alignment passes through are St Mary's East Barnet, Halliwick Hospital, Fryan Barnet, Muswell Hill, the Pavilion in Highgate Woods, St Joseph's at the summit of Highgate Hill, Pond Square, Highgate Hill, the United Reformed Church, South Grove, Highgate, the Catacombs in Highgate Cemetery, Highgate, Baptist Chapel, Highgate Baptist Chapel at the corner of Chetwynd Road, NW5, the Church of the Holy Trinity, Clarence Way, NW1, Our Lady of the Halo, Arlington Road, Camden, St Mary Magdalene, Minster Square, W1, the Central Synagogue, Hallam Street, W1, the Queen Victoria Memorial Fountain in front of Buckingham Palace, which is also on the Buckingham Palace lay, Westminster Cathedral, the Church of St George and St Andrew, Patmore Street, 9 Elms, St Peter's Parish Church, Clapham Manor Road, St Leonard's Parish Church, Streatham, the Church of Emmanuel with St Anselm, Streatham Common, St Bartholomew's Catholic Church, South Streatham, Pollard's Hill, Norbury. What is immediately striking from the list is the preponderance of places of worship. The second prominent point is the immense variation in age and type of worship in each of the buildings. Westminster Cathedral rubs shoulders with the Central Synagogue, as well as Baptist and United Reformed churches, and no doubt the others represent various shades of opinion in between. Few would seem to have very many points of agreement on matters of religion, yet the proportion of modern buildings indicates the element of subconscious sighting. All have been placed on the line for some reason by powers which for most would be unimaginable. There must be some common denominator which links them all. But if a single lay, even one as good as this, is convincing, how much more so is a centre, a convergence of lays on one spot, with a monument to mark it. It's one of these we consider next, which even more strikingly illustrates the lay system's acceptance of many and varied places of worship. In an issue of Touchstone published in 1991, I mentioned that 2 lays cross at the site of the mosque in Woking. Since then I have found a third, and all seem particularly good alignments, composed of some prehistoric, some ancient Christian, and some subconsciously sighted points. 2 of the most prominent, a standing stone and an ancient beacon site, were noticed after the line appropriate to each was drawn, giving further encouragement that the lines are significant. Subsequent to this, I found 3 more, perhaps not of such high quality as the first 3, but quite good nonetheless, and all linking places of worship, covering a very wide time scale, extremely so if one counts the stone.
The Shell Guide to England tells us Woking has the biggest mosque in England, founded by Dr. Leitner, an accomplished linguist and Orientalist. In 1885 he founded an Oriental Institute in a building which had previously been a drama school. A few years later he erected a mosque in the grounds. After the doctor's death, the institute ceased to function, but the mosque continued to fulfil its role and became a centre of Islamic religion and life in this country. The mosque is an unusual building with a large green sphere above it, topped by the crescent, which is the symbol of Islam. What interested me most, however, was the clump of Scots pines just behind it. There was another nearby at the end of Oriental Road, the significance of which was to become clear shortly after my visit to the site. There is also a small clump at the entrance to the path leading to the mosque. This clump is on one of the leys and was found after the ley was drawn. I previously found 2 leys through the mosque. The first came through an earthwork on Chobham Common and a standing stone on Halsell Common, not marked on the map. I found it some years ago when following another ley on the ground. A picture of it is in an earlier edition of Touchstone. When drawing this present line, I did not notice the stone was on it until after the line was drawn. From here the line continues through the mosque, the large multi-junction at the bottom of Maybury Hill, a moat at Boughton Hall, and a crossroads, now a roundabout, on the A247 near West Clarendon. This is the line passing through the small clump at the mosque entrance. The second ley goes through St Nicholas Church, Purford, a Norman building in a circular churchyard, a striking hilltop site which even conventional archaeologists have said is likely to have been a prehistoric one. It just misses the chapel of the Anglican convent in Sandy Lane, but when visiting the site I found it goes directly through a huge Scots pine clump on the hill, only 100 yards from it. The ley then passes through St Paul's, a small 19th century church across the road from the mosque, before meeting the Islamic building. It then continues through a church in Bagshot and the Roman Star, a junction of several tracks on a Roman road called the Devil's Highway, the road from London to Caliva Atrebatum, or Silchester as it now is. Having found these 2 lines previously, I decided after visiting the area and finding the 2 clumps to see if there might be a line through the Oriental Road clump and the mosque. Continuing this alignment roughly westward, I found it passed through Christchurch near Woking Station, and the crematorium chapel. The subconscious sighting influences did not even reject this. Consider Highgate Cemetery catacombs mentioned in the last chapter. It passes very close to Brookwood Church. This could do with investigation in case there are other circumstances, such as with the convent clump, or the church being slightly misplaced as it's adjoining a road. This sometimes happened as the width of roads on maps is much more than their scale width. Then it goes through an unmarked centre on the A325 at Farnborough and a prominent looking road junction at Crookham Village. I decided to draw the line on the strength of these points. Then when examining it, my heart seemed to miss a beat, for the line went directly through Odium Firs, the prominent beacon site we visited on Chris Hall's ecology field trip with the Surrey and London Earth Mysteries groups in April 1990. This is an ancient beacon site said to have been used at the time of the Spanish Armada. 2 further points are a hilltop wood on a sharp bend at Biddon and a crossroads at Tunworth. When I tried an alignment through St Paul's Church, Addlestone, I found the line also passes through Peeper Harrow Church, also on a good lay, passing through Byfleet Church and Newark Priory, investigated by our group some years ago. Other points on the Addlestone line include a small church at Mayford, and mean following road nearby, and a crossroads near Pitch Place. When walking round Woking following these points, I came across the Friends Meeting House, a 20th century bungalow used for Quaker worship, mentioned in the previous chapter. Aligning this with the mosque later, I found the line also goes through a church in Shearwater, very close to a tumulus near there, which is adjoining a road, so could be slightly misplaced as mentioned before, but it could be taken in if the line is as wide as the E line we were following on the Pitch Hill project. Continuing on, the line goes through the mosque and the Friends Meeting House, and then to the tower on Chinthurst Hill, south of Guildford, a spot-marked junction at Scotland's Farm near Hascombe, and a coincident track at Plaistow. The finding of the two significant points, as well as the mosque entrance clump, after drawing their leys, indicated to me at least that there was some subconscious influence even in the drawing of the lines, that they were being shown to me to illustrate some important point. What these lines seem to show us is that the leys make no distinction whatsoever between the buildings of different religious faiths. This seems to demonstrate that there is a higher truth behind all religious observance, which transcends particular doctrines and to some extent makes them irrelevant, except by virtue of the fact that they bring people together to worship the Creator, and somehow, by doing so, activate the life-giving grid of leys which covers the earth. This throws into sharp relief the absurdity of the quibbles and atrocities that take place between the members of various faiths and sub-faiths. Bob Dickinson has done research into another seemingly subconsciously cited lay centre, the Guru Nanak Sikh Temple in Scunthorpe. This temple was not specifically constructed for followers of the Sikh faith in Scunthorpe, but occupies a bungalow originally built in the 1950s. The building was formerly used as a domestic dwelling and a warehouse. It's located on Normanby Road, at a major crossroads in the old Crosby area of the town. Initial research has revealed the existence of 3 alignments passing through the site of the temple. A case of subconscious sighting, perhaps? 8 miles in length and possibly aligned with the midwinter moonrise, but this requires more detailed checking. The line is entered at St Michael's Church, a prefabricated structure dating from the 1950s, and continues through the Crosby or Stock stone, Ethel Rudkin recounts the folklore attached to this ancient stone in her Lincolnshire Folklore. Many years ago a farmer buried the stone in a corner of his stackyard to prevent the local village lads congregating around it in their spare time. For many years it remained buried until a tree was to be planted to commemorate the accession of King Edward VII. In order to improve the prosperity of Old Crosby, the old stone was dug up and set up at the base of the tree. It has been suggested that the stone should have been originally sited close to the village stocks, like the stone at Grimston, Leicestershire. The line now passes through the sacred part of the Sikh temple, where worship takes place, and on through the crossroads to the site of the old Mesolithic settlement on Risby Warren. Two tree clumps frame its passage through this area on the north and south sides respectively. The next significant point on the alignment is the crossroads at Appleby, and 2 medieval cross bases, neither of which are in situ according to the local archaeological survey. The Norman Church of St Bartholomew is the next point. Restored in the 19th century, the facade of the building is adorned with a multitude of green men and other pagan carvings. A recent and finely edged seal of Solomon is to be found on the tower. I was particularly intrigued by the next point, or rather area, Ewell Close. This name seemed to be particularly significant, considering the midwinter moonrise angle of the line, and the obvious Ewell collections. touching the edge of a moat infilled with indications of a second moated enclosure. And remember the importance of these features in the rites of the old religion, seen Nigel Pennick's Practical Magic in the Northern Tradition. The path of the alignment continues on through a possible 3 lane ends, the traditional meeting place of witches, before terminating at a crossing of tracks high up on a hill at Saxby All Saints. The second alignment enters at the Crosby Primitive Methodist Chapel, built in 1885. The line passes through the Guru Nanak Temple, touching the edge of the Iron Age Romano-British settlement at Dragonby, and onto the sunken church, or Dragon Rock. The latter is a 90-foot-long, serpent-like natural outcrop, having a curious groove running along its entire length. It's commonly acknowledged to have been an object of pagan veneration in ancient times, and is in close proximity to a natural spring, with petrifying qualities. Various tales are told in connection with the rock, namely that it's the remains of a church that sunk into the ground many years ago, and at certain times of the year the singing of the congregation can be heard. On through the Mesolithic settlement atop Sheffield's Hill, and the 14th century church at Roxby, the alignment terminates at a well to the north of Winterton. The latter place name intrigues me, as it stands at the northern extremity of the alignment, with all the resultant associations between north and winter, Winterton, Wintertown, even perhaps Wintertone, a northern songline. The shortest and to some the most suspect of the 3 alignments is entered at Elim Pentecostal Church. On through the Guru Nanak Temple, a tumulus on Santon Hill, and terminating at a wooded area known as the Follies. See Watkins' Old Straight Track for discussion around this place name.
There seems to be some evidence that the sound used in places of worship may be one of the reasons for the subconscious sighting of these places on leys. In other words, it may boost their life-supporting energies. The late Paul Baines, in his report on the Kent survey of Tony Wedd's work, noted that at Gill's lap his attention was drawn to the sound of the wind in the trees. So was mine, though perhaps for different reasons. To me it seemed as though the sound was similar to that of a rushing stream, and also that of a roaring fire. All 3 of these have lay associations: beacon fires, hilltop clumps and streams, both surface and underground. So I decided to see if the frequencies were indeed as similar as they seemed. I made a tape recording examples of all 3 types of sound, and they did indeed sound very similar. Not having frequency measuring equipment, I had to compare them by ear to notes of known frequency generated by my BBC microcomputer. The results were as follows: the bonfire at a local church grounds, 320 cycles per second, or E. Water, the stream on the same grounds, 256 cycles per second, or middle C. Wind, Scots Pines in Addlestone and Chiddingstone, and Bamboo Addlestone, 320 cycles per second, E. As will be seen, the notes were all very similar, all being within the frequency range of 250 to 320 cycles per second. 3 notes on the scale. Could it be that sound at these frequencies is transduced at lay points to boost the earth current, and this is the reason for streams, fires, beacons and clumps occurring on leys? There are a number of indications why that might be so. One is the fact that sound from the ringing pillars of the amazing round temple church in the City of London is also around this frequency. This Templar foundation is now the church of the legal profession and is financially supported by them. The pillars supporting the round can be made to ring either by beating with the fists or singing a note between one of the pairs of pillars. The sound has been compared to that of a generator, and this is approximately middle C. Church music in general, but particularly plainsong, tends to average around this frequency range. Some recorded church music gave 320 cycles per second E, and some recorded plainsong 256 middle C. So possibly churches are putting power back into the leys, a possible reason for their importance in the system, though not disregarding possible spiritual importance to the system of two, of course, positive thinking in the form of prayer. It's possible that the thought and sound may complement each other in the system. Eileen Roche said that the energy seemed to increase during an evensong at Salisbury Cathedral some years ago. More recently, in July 1996, on a field trip with the Travel and Earth Mysteries Society, she found the energy seemed to increase in waves when the deeper notes were sounded in a service in St Albans Cathedral. 3 weeks prior to this, she had an amazing experience when visiting Four Knocks in Ireland with a group of friends. The dolmen there is lavishly decorated with megalithic art, some of which is included an undulating line running round the site. Some there took this to indicate a musical sound and walked round this chanting, reading the decoration as if it was musical notation. A bright light appeared from the stones, moved round them and then disappeared upwards. Finally, we come to the case of the DeLand installation, an immense device used in California to keep frost off orange groves, the details of which were apparently derived from extraterrestrial sources. Tony Wedd was interested in it for the latter reason, and because it was used 7 equally spaced copper wires radiating from the centre to the edge of each acre plot. But it also incorporated a tall mast of galvanised iron tubing to very precise specifications. Could it be that the wind blowing across this would produce a note similar to our ubiquitous frequency, as a note is produced when blowing across the top of a milk bottle? I wonder. So there seem to be 2 factors in the seemingly energy-boosting phenomena of subconscious sighting. One is the production of sound, which increases the energy. The other is the worship itself, the actual attempts at communion with the creative intelligence behind the universe, in whatever form it's perceived. To put these matters into perspective, by showing from what background these ideas sprang, it seems appropriate to describe my own beliefs here. I would emphasise, however, that I'm not proposing them as gospel, nor expecting anyone else to follow them. Certainly I would not want to propose a new doctrine. There are quite enough of those already. The idea that they may all be quite wrong. I would certainly be very surprised if they were all correct. Nevertheless, they are my perspective on the relationship of doctrine with worship, and as such may be of interest in connection with what has been discussed. We have what seems to be a dichotomy, an apparently universal network of worship, with its members nonetheless divided into sharply differing doctrinal factions. I've no doubt there are leys linking synagogues in Tel Aviv and mosques in Baghdad, as well as Catholic and Protestant churches in Ireland. And they're all unconsciously joining together in their worship. What then is the significance of doctrine? It surely can't be that it's all wrong. Yet it's impossible for it all to be right, for there are many mutually exclusive ideas. It would seem that each of the religions has facets that are logically and likely, and others which are less so. Buddhism, for example, seems to have a much more rational afterlife doctrine than Christianity. The former faith believes in reincarnation and karma, the idea that people learn through a succession of lives in which they're rewarded or punished for previous actions. But there doesn't seem to be any idea of a permanent, inescapable hell. Christianity, however, would seem to commit a soul to eternal bliss or torment on the basis of one brief life, in which opportunities have always been very unequal. It seems neither fair nor logical. Nevertheless, Christianity seems to score over Buddhism on its concept of a personal creator interested in his creation. In fact, this seems to square more with karma than with the Christian one-chance system. Paganism in its various forms would seem from our view of the lay system to be correct in acknowledging the earth to be a living being with whom we live in a kind of symbiosis. But it tends to resist the idea of a universal creative spirit, probably as a reaction to Christian opposition, and it seems to rather over-anthropomorphise the subtle forces behind the universe. This is only a brief look at one or two doctrines of some of the world's religions, of course. A complete appraisal would be a life's work. Nevertheless, it would seem that most of the faiths have some of the jigsaw of truth, bound around with a lot of embroidery which is probably mostly false. We are probably on much firmer ground if we consider the points on which they all agree. The existence of a creative intelligence or intelligences behind the universe, and the necessity of prayer and worship. Where does all this leave you if you are the followers of a particular faith? Certainly I would not advocate asking anyone to give up any of their beliefs. The lay system, and thus whatever may lie behind it, accepts them all, so it's not for anyone else to do otherwise. Certainly the forming of yet another sect would do no good at all. Rather, I would suggest broadening the outlook to recognise all faiths as different, but equally valid paths to the creative power of the universe, however it might be visualised, and that the worship of all joined together through the leys which link their houses of prayer. As one person once put it, in one of my Earth Mysteries group meetings, they are all just different hoses to one petrol tank in the sky. Surely then, the hatred which exists between religions and sub-religions must be capable of being overcome. I've no idea if the human mind with its emotional attachment to particular creeds is capable of this quantum leap. However, it seems certain that this is what the universal powers are asking us to do, and further advancement of the human race may be impossible if we do not.